And just to try and convince people I don't sit in my ivory tower and never leave it, and I do speak to people. And actually, that's the first thing to say. Thanks very much for inviting me. It's actually a lovely space to be here, and it's great to see you and to hear about the campaigns, the amazingly brave campaigns that have been going on here and in North Edinburgh. So I do want to start by telling a story which relates to Grenfell Tower and the inquiry that was just mentioned there. Vicky and I actually went to the preliminary hearing of the official inquiry, and it was ridiculous. I don't know if you remember, I was in shorts. I mean, that's how unprepared we were. We just happened to be in London. We thought, okay, we'll go along just to see. We know it's going to be a stitch-up. We know every public inquiry is a stitch-up, but it's always very important to represent our concerns so that at the end of it we can say it was a stitch-up. So Vicky actually got up and said a lot of the things that she said today, and we were allowed to talk, and I got up and said a lot of things I'm about to say. And there were people from the Fire Brigade Union, there were people from the different residents groups that had begun to form. The local MP Emma Dent Code was there, and very, very strongly condemning the way that she thought that. Sorry? You don't... Yeah, it's a bit of a generalisation, you're right. Okay. Maybe we could come back and talk about that. I'm not trying to just kind of deflect it, but we could maybe come back and talk about that, right? It was clear from the outset that this was going to be a stitch-up, and I think that the experience of the campaigners and the people there I've shown that, because all of the issues that Vicky was talking about and all of the issues that we heard in the film are not going to be included. This is not going to be an inquiry into social housing and into housing provision. Now, I'm not going to kind of genuflect and then start defending public inquiries, but I've been involved in very big campaigns for at least 3 different public inquiries in my lifetime, so I'm not completely dismissing them. But when we can come back and talk, this one is a stitch-up, and it's stitching up the people of that area, because it's not going to talk about the bonfire of red tape that was just mentioned. It's not going to talk about the way in which social housing has changed in this country. It's not going to talk about some of the things that I was about to talk about. But can I just tell a story? Because the story is, we were able to talk, and we were able to kind of voice our opinions, and it was kind of interesting because what then happens, immediately the meeting closes, and of course a very wide range of issues are raised that don't end up in the inquiry. A police officer in plain clothes comes up and introduces herself as a police officer to Vicky and I, and tries to hand us a piece of paper. And the piece of paper was kind of strange, because it was just a handwritten police officer's name with a handwritten number. And they said, "Now, we're very interested in what you had to say. We'd like to keep in contact with you." And these police officers went around everyone, and particularly focusing on the local residents. And every time they gave a piece of paper, it was handwritten. It wasn't a police. They weren't in uniforms. It wasn't handwritten. It was a kind of friendly, kind of soft policing approach that was being taken. And in talking to one of the campaigners that I know, that they know now that there have been people involved in the campaigns, and you sound like conspiracy theory when you say this, that have been kept an eye on. They know there have been plainclothes police officers who've admitted later they're plainclothes police officers before people knew them, and they got involved in the campaigns. Now, I think that kind of happens in any public campaign that's going to be strong. We know what happened in the Stephen Lawrence campaign. The public inquiry that's going on right now happens to be, I think, probably not as much of a stitch-up, but there is a public inquiry into spy cops right now. Now, the big question that this raises for me is what our public servants should be doing. And it follows on from the point Vicky made about the vast amount of public resources that's going into particular parts of state spending, right? And of course there is a debate about cuts in the police and all the rest of it. Actually, in terms of austerity, and I'm not going to say that the police haven't suffered, but total cuts to the police force have been about 19%. Total cuts to local authorities have been about 40%, right? And if you look at the bonfire of red tape that was mentioned in the last contribution, the public services, and the public servants I think should be valued and are never valued, health and safety inspectors, building inspectors, housing inspectors. I mean, we have a fraction of those kind of services in this country now that we had even 20 years ago, a fraction. And one example of that is if you're in the work, we hear all this rubbish all the time about health and safety has gone mad in this country. The last time we saw it was when they were talking about Big Ben. Oh, you can't stop Big Ben going dong, because I don't know if this story reached up here, it's kind of irrelevant, except they were going to make workers work in very dangerous conditions because health and safety had gone mad. We hear that as a kind of mantra. I thought Grenfell Tower would have got rid of that, because I know from other research that I've been doing that the average chances now of a workplace being inspected is once in 50 years. In fact, most of us now work in workplaces that will never be inspected, and that's because of the cuts to not just the health and safety executive, but to local authority inspectors. And I have to say that one of the reasons we try to think about the end of social protection, not quite the end, but the undermining of social protection to such an extent that we're not protected, isn't just about the welfare system. It's not just about the welfare benefits and about the housing system. It's also about the workplace and about the environment. The Environment Agency that protects our air and our water is facing cuts of up to 43% over the austerity period. I mean, you know, look at the constant discussion about the quality of the air in cities like Edinburgh and Glasgow and London, and we're cutting back on the people that protect us. So the social protection is happening there in that kind of bonfire of red tape, and of course, very importantly, I don't just blame the Tories for this. This is much, and it's not just about austerity. This actually goes back much longer. And if you look at some of the key legislation that took away the responsibility for fire safety from publicly funded fire officers to private consultants, that was actually introduced in 2005 by Labour. Labour are not blameless here. But it's certainly intensified. It's intensified under the austerity governments, and the mantra of unnecessary regulation. Those are words that were repeated 3 times when in Parliament there was an attempt to introduce legislation which would allow, I mean it's not much of a concession, would allow individual tenants more rights when they prosecuted landlords for putting them in shoddy housing. And that was knocked back 3 times by the Conservatives with the mantra unnecessary regulation, red tape, getting in the way of business, a burden on business. We hear that all the time, and what austerity has done, it's intensified an economy which prioritises the needs of business above the needs of all of us and above human needs. That's what the austerity period has actually intensified for a number of, I think, quite complex reasons. You look at fire services. Fire services, there's a report by the National Audit Office, excuse me, last year, which found that between 2010 and 2015, funding for standalone fire services fell in real terms on average by 28% in that period. So clearly that's context for Grenfell Tower. And it's particularly context for Grenfell Tower because we know that checks in tower blocks in that period fell by 25%. And we know from that same report that the areas that were most acutely affected were the poorest areas in the United Kingdom. So these are cutbacks that don't, as the last statement we heard from Sarah is that a name from the Grenfell? From Sue Carroll. Sorry, Sue Carroll this disproportionately affects people living in poor areas. They're falling hardest on the poorest local authorities. The other thing that's gone on in this privatisation, in this period, has been privatisation and intensification of the privatisation of regulation. Right? I'm sorry, I know it's almost 9 o'clock on a Friday night, and you're hearing some academic going, the intensification of the privatisation of regulation. Okay, I'm going to say 2 things very clearly. The first thing is, I think that the Audit Commission was quite an important body that held our public authorities to account. It's been abolished. I don't know how many people know that. It's been abolished. And we could talk all night about what that means in different sectors, but it basically means the big accounting firms, most of whom are constantly in and out of the courts in corruption cases, And that's something I won't apologise for, because the KPMG is a company that I counted at least 4 major fraud cases last year. Who's responsible for auditing the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea? Who was responsible for auditing all the spending that was cut back in Grenfell Tower? KPMG. Who was responsible for auditing the company that renovated Grenfell Tower in 2016, that put the cladding on, that's been most questioned? Who's responsible for auditing Ryden? KPMG. Who's responsible for auditing all of the major PFI renovation and construction projects in London involving Ryden? KPMG. So you have a kind of privatisation of the watchdogs, of the regulators, which is highly problematic here. If you go into government, if you look at, actually there's the body in central government that's responsible for regulating standards in building is a body now called BRE Global. Used to be a public, BRE used to be the public regulator, it's now rebranded and been privatised. And last year, in April 2016, this private regulator said the safety regulations in the United Kingdom on cladding are adequate. That's exactly what they said, they're adequate. So, when they started testing, I mean, they set up an independent expert advisory panel to do tests. This, by the way, is in the Department of Communities and Local Government in Whitehall. So they set up a body to do the tests, and 2 of the people that were on that advisory panel are also part of BRE Global. And most of the people on both panels work for private companies that don't necessarily supply cladding, but are involved in the building industry. So it's not just a revolving door we've got here. You know that phrase, revolving door, where you've got public and private exchange of personnel. The private sector's inside government making decisions about fire safety standards that led to Grenfell Tower. I mean, it's as black and white as that. It's as clear as that. This is the privatisation of regulation, which, by the way, has been hastened under austerity, and if we had more time to get into it, we could talk about how George Osborne particularly argued for privatisation to recover some costs for the public purse, because, as Vicky said, we'd all maxed out our credit cards. So it's all part of the austerity story. Grenfell is at the heart of the austerity story, and it's at the heart of this bonfire of red tape story. It's really interesting. I did a bit of research into what building inspectors in Kensington and Chelsea were doing in the 2 or 3 years leading up to the Grenfell Tower, because for me it's, you know, we seem to have forgotten that we need to value these public servants. I value the inspectors that uphold safety, so okay, what were they doing? And what, more importantly, were they being directed by their council to do? Or by Kensington and Chelsea. Now, if you remember, I mean, it's kind of gone off the radar a little bit, but one of the points that a lot of local people were saying after Grenfell Tower was that the cladding, and we don't know if the cladding is responsible or not, it seems to be still the main focus, but the cladding was an aesthetic measure, and it was an aesthetic measure that was fitted onto not just that tower block, but tower blocks around the area, because the people in the rich parts of Kensington and Chelsea needed to have an area, live in an area that looked relatively clean, right? Or that there was an aesthetics of gentrification that was part of that £3 million budget for cladding on Grenfell Tower. So what were building inspectors doing? Well, there was 2 major initiatives in Kensington and Chelsea that the building inspectors were doing, right? And one of them involved prosecutions. In 2015, there was a number of prosecutions of construction firms for putting up advertisements on the side of the blocks they were renovating, or for not keeping the netting that they were using clean enough or tidy enough. They were being prosecuted for aesthetic measures. I'm not saying they're not important, they're important. But they were being prosecuted for aesthetic measures, not for safety critical issues. That wasn't the priority. In 2016, the priority was noise. And I'm not saying noise isn't important, but building inspectors were told to go onto building sites and tell people to control the noise, because rich tenants, largely in the richest parts of the borough, were complaining about noise. And I'm not saying that's not important, but it's not about safety critical issues. This is a gentrification driven regulation that was going on in Grenfell, and certainly part of that, I think, we have to say part of that austerity agenda, because the other thing that's intensified is the demand for inward investment. We want inward investment, and gentrification in ways that very often disregard. Vicky didn't talk about it, but she's also studied the populations that have been evicted in the big estates in London as part of this gentrification drive. I think I've probably kind of gone over my time, but I do want to say something else that I think is really important, because it does build directly on what Sue Cadro said. She said that there had been a series of cuts to council tax in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, and I think this is absolutely crucial. She talked about 167 million pounds was taken from the reserves and paid out to rich tenants in council tax. And you kind of think, well, in the context of Grenfell Tower, that doesn't seem that serious. It's absolutely fundamental to understanding Grenfell Tower. They call these payments, by the way, an efficiency dividend. Efficiency dividend, that's the language of Margaret Thatcher. We're making efficiency savings here. It's an efficiency dividend. That's the language of shareholder investment. You get a dividend. They're treating the people in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea like they're investing in a private company, so they treat the ones with the most shares, the highest, what they see as the highest contribution to the community, the best. They're getting the biggest dividend. Well, do you know where that dividend came from? Because I'm lucky to have a friend called Joe Benjamin who's been in to get the figures, some of these figures that actually Kensington and Chelsea, there's an odd story that I probably shouldn't be telling you. But they weren't going to give the figures until Lily Allen showed up with my mate Joe Benjamin, because she's a local resident and she was able to demand as a local resident access to the figures. So we have to thank Joel and Lily Allen for these figures. Lily Allen's been very outspoken on this, to be serious. Actually, she's been a very, very important voice, I think, in a lot of this. Anyway, where did that money come from? In one year, this is on an annual basis. Spending on planning. Sorry, I'll get this right. I'm going to give you the percentages rather than the figures. So, over a 5-year period to pay for that dividend, spending on planning fell by 81%. Spending on housing fell by 76%. Spending on regulatory controls fell by 22%. These are all of the features that we found at driving Grenfell Tower. This was an austerity that Kensington and Chelsea imposed on themselves. They didn't do it. It's the richest borough in the country. They didn't need to do it, right? And in a way, we have to hold their politicians accountable in a very different way than we hold our politicians accountable, because they had real choices. These councillors, and it was almost exclusively Tory councillors, made these choices, were told about the risks, knew about the risks. We know from the way in which residents at Grenfell Tower were trying to raise the series of safety critical issues that they'd identified with their tenancy management organisation. The same Tory councillors that ignored them on that tenancy management organisation were in the council chambers voting to reduce the housing budget, the planning budget and the regulatory budget at that level. They're responsible for this as much as anyone. So this is partly about austerity, but it's also about a politics that academics like to call a neoliberal politics. I think maybe not everyone in the room, but you know what I mean. A politics which intensifies value to not just private businesses, but also to wealthier participants in the economy. And that's what austerity has done. That's what austerity has done. It's intensified that. And certainly the people who died in Grenfell Tower are victims of those economic policies.